I'd like to welcome you to this edition of the award-winning PRS Journal Club podcast with your hosts, Drs. Francesco Egro, Nicole Phillips, and Ira Savetsky. Enjoy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the August 2018 edition of the PRS Monthly Podcast. I'm Nicole Phillips, resident ambassador from the Harvard Plastic Surgery Program, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-resident ambassadors, Francesco Egro from the University of Pittsburgh and Ira Savetsky from NYU. This month, we are honored to have Dr. Andrea Pusic join us as our guest moderator. Dr. Pusic is Chief of Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery and Director of the Patient-Reported Outcomes, Value, and Experience Center at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Dr. Pusic, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great, thanks, Nikki, for having me.
Before we begin our discussion, I want to remind our listeners that this article, and every article we discuss on the PRS Monthly Journal Club podcasts, is available for free online in the PRS archives. You can also find selected article and video pairings to complement each of these highlighted articles. The article we are focusing on today is entitled Social Media and the Dissemination of Research, Insights from the Most Widely Circulated Articles in Plastic Surgery by Zhu et al., with Dr. Amir Dorfshar serving as the senior author. This article is a thoughtful attempt to quantify a new metric that has recently entered the academic sphere, namely the use of social media as a platform for the dissemination of scholarly articles. In general, over the past few years, significant attention has been paid to the realm of social media within our journals, at regional and national meetings, and most importantly, in the world around us. The advent of social media and the ethical, professional, and medical legal issues that accompany the use of social media in medicine are topics which no plastic surgeon today can afford to ignore. But putting some of these big picture questions aside for now, the authors of this article chose to focus on a particular aspect of how social media is changing the way we communicate with each other and with our patients. Specifically, the authors wanted to study the impact of social media on published research. In order to do so, they identified the top 10 plastic surgery journals by impact factor, as well as the top 10 most widely circulated articles from these journals, according to the Altmetric Attention Score. The Altmetric Attention Score is a tool used to define the impact of an academic article's dissemination across various web-based media platforms. The algorithm assigns scores based on the number of downloads, references, and shares that articles attract on various web-based platforms, including news outlets and blogs, as well as social media sites, including Facebook and Twitter. Greater weight is given to high-impact, reputable sources such as recognized news outlets, with lesser weight assigned to personal blogs and social media pages. The group then examined the social media presence of the journals themselves and the first and last authors of the selected articles, identifying those authors and journals who had public profiles on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. To evaluate social media activity, the group examined the numbers of posts and likes that the authors or journals had contributed to these sites. To evaluate social media audience size, the team looked at the number of followers or likes that the authors or journals had compiled on those sites. A generalized linear model was then determined to define the relationship between an author's social media presence and the popularity of his or her article. This model was then expanded by including journal social media activity and journal social media audience size to study the relationship between social media use and altmetric scores. I won't get into all of the specific details of how these models were built, but it is worth noting that 2 authors with an extremely active social media presence were ultimately excluded from the study and considered outliers. I was somewhat surprised by the findings of this article. Based on the models defined by the authors, there was no statistically significant relationship between an author's social media activity and the altmetric score of his or her article. Interestingly, there was a negative association between an author's social media audience size and the altmetric score of his or her article. I found this result a little bit hard to understand, especially when the opposite was true when looking at the journals. Because in fact, an increased social media audience size for journals was associated with an increased altmetric score for the related article. The authors suggest that a possible explanation for the negative association between an author's social media audience size and the altmetric score of their article is that authors are not using social media for this purpose, namely promoting their own academic publications. Rather, it is imagined that these authors may be engaging with social media for other purposes, including connecting with peers or endorsing products or sales. I'm not sure I'm totally convinced by this argument, especially because the algorithm that is used to calculate the altmetric score itself incorporates adjustments for indications that authors are self-promoting their articles. As this seems to be the very thing we are trying to study, adjustments based on those authors promoting their own articles will almost certainly skew the results of how those two metrics intersect. Ultimately, however, it is very interesting to think about the ways in which social media has, quote-unquote, traditionally been used, and how we could start to think about it in a more academic and rigorous manner. The authors suggest that if an objective and reliable metric could be established to measure the impact of an author's social media presence, then this would be a reasonable factor to consider when looking at academic promotion. This is a concept that has already been adopted by the Mayo Clinic. This is especially relevant when we consider that the tool currently accepted for quantifying scholarship is the H-index, an author-level measure of academic impact, which looks at how many articles an author has published and how many times each of these articles has been cited. But academic citations may take months to years to change substantially and is not reflective of the dynamic times in which we live, in which the majority of research by both academic and public spheres is performed online. Social media metrics could potentially allow analysis of productivity and academic dissemination in real time. So Dr. Pusic, I'd love to get your thoughts on how social media is potentially going to impact the academic sphere. As the division chief of plastic surgery at a major academic institution, I'm curious to hear your thoughts both on the use of social media within an academic setting. Is this appropriate? What boundaries should we set? And then what about the potential impact of social media and other web-based platforms on academic promotion?
I really like this article because I think it sort of makes us think differently and sort of, think about things I hadn't completely pondered to any deep extent. I think that the potential value, I think change is good, and I think evolution is great, and I think that we're all aware of the limitations of impact factors and the limitations of H-indices. I also think that one of the things that we've struggled with for always within our clinical research and all aspects of research has been about dissemination. It takes a very long time for even if we do a great study happens, for the findings of that study to work their way into clinical care. And so where I see the value of social media is in the dissemination of really high quality research. And I think that, as researchers, our mandate is to perform really high quality research and then, as much as possible, to then guide the dissemination of those findings. I do see that different than promotion. To me, promoting my research or promoting the research of a specific investigator would not be so much the goal, but dissemination of high quality research is very much a goal. And that's where I see that the value of social media in an academic setting is that investigators have the opportunity to perform high quality research. The good things about our current system is peer review, so that's clearly a key component of it. But then I think studies that are well done and are in high quality journals like PRS that are clinically relevant and meaningful, social media gives us the opportunity that they don't just sit on the shelf, those studies, that they actually change practice on a faster timeline than what we've previously been used to.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the most interesting parts about the changing times in which we live. Ira, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this article.
I thought this was a really interesting study and really, again, highlights the power of social media. And I think our journal has done an outstanding job in recognizing this early on, and really was sort of one of the pioneers in terms of plastic surgery journals and journals in general, probably trying to have a large social media presence and disseminating the research that's published there. I think it's also important for us as plastic surgeon trainees and ultimately plastic surgeons who, will go on to hopefully become board certified plastic surgeons to really promote evidence-based medicine and research within our field, because there have been previous studies showing that people on Twitter that are disseminating information about plastic surgery, it's coming from people who are not plastic surgeons. So I think it is important moving forward for our academic institutions to sort of emphasize this, because I think if we don't, we're going to really fall behind, and there's going to be a lot of sort of bad or false information out there. But I do think it's tricky, and I think there aren't any clear guidelines, and it's hard to monitor these things from, I guess, a standpoint from our institutions as well as from the American Board of Plastic Surgery. Having said that, Dr. Pusic, should we start thinking about using other metrics to assess journal impact? Traditionally we have the impact factor used to sort of assess how many citations, but are we really capturing what we want to capture? And do you think we should start incorporating other factors such as this study highlights?
I would echo the words you said earlier, that it's tricky. How do we sort of, how is this about dissemination of really high quality research as opposed to promotion of of either individual investigators or poor quality research, and then furthermore, how do we sort of, even how that goes into the public domain, and how patients are seeing that information. In terms of how this fits in terms of impact factors and how journals also differentiate themselves, I personally now in my research, I will be a journal that is a high quality journal that I know will also disseminate the research well. I think that's kind of a great combination. Again, I think that's what PRS has been striving to do, and to offer both that we get the word out. And so I think that's where this evolution and the change is positive. But as you said, it's tricky and has to be managed well. But I do think we will gradually move away from the pure impact factor that we're thinking about. So that's where I think the altmetric score, I think, is actually, it's a step in the right direction, but it has to be all that has to be managed very well in terms of that it's not being swayed heavily, which I think is, I don't think we're necessarily seeing that was being swayed heavily in the promotion direction, but more the dissemination, and that the emphasis is on high quality research that's impactful and can change practice in a positive way.
I think taking advantage of social media while still staying within the confines of sort of being ethical and sort of appropriate is going to be key. Francesco, what are some of your thoughts about this paper?
I learned a lot from this article. I mean, we're all into social media a lot, especially given our position as resident ambassadors, and I felt that this article gave me an exceptional insight into the benefits of social media for the academic surgeon. I also appreciate Nikki's comments, which honestly, they're very valid. So I think perhaps the results we have to take with a pinch of salt, but I think overall the paper was really good and gave some great information. Just for our listeners, I just wanted to reiterate what we're talking about when we talk about the altmetric score, which is an estimate of the magnitude of an academic's article's dissemination across various web-based media platforms. And this takes into consideration the frequency of clicks, references, and shares that a given article gains across Twitter, Facebook, and newer outlets like blogs and so on. The reason that I'm saying this is just because I can already picture some of my teachers and mentors that are listening to our podcast and are like, what the hell is that altmetric score? Because everyone is familiar with the impact factor. But my take-home message for this article is that I feel that if you want your research to get known, or you want to try to disseminate it, the best platforms are LinkedIn, which surprised me, and Facebook and Twitter. And I thought it was interesting finding that the altmetric scores are associated with the journal's Twitter followers, but not with the author's social media activity. And as they state, which is the equivalent of 75% more tweets, 14% more shares on a blog, or 9% more mentions in the news. But Dr. Pusic has already mentioned the importance of dissemination versus promotion, and I feel that could be potentially a fine line. So my question as a young, aspiring academic plastic surgeon, what would be the best way to disseminate our research when we publish?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's taking some new directions. So I think what we do know is that the old model of something just being in a paper journal doesn't work in today's world. And so I think looking to publish your research in journals that are forward-thinking is key. I think it's going back to sort of first principles, though, in terms of doing high-quality research that's meaningful. If what your product is very good, then you're going to want to and should disseminate it widely so that it gets good uptake and actually changes practice. That's why we do research. So I think it's multimodal. I think it's not about throwing out what we've always done in the past, but we can improve upon it. But I think we have to be mindful that it's not just about tweeting about our own research or about the research of our friends. The goal truly is that things that we read about, that we say, this is a really great paper, and others should be reading it, that's kind of the key in terms of us disseminating great research as a community of plastic surgeons. And that, again, I think is about a little bit more than just thinking about your own research, but also thinking about how do we as a community of plastic surgeons ensure that the very best research is shared among our colleagues widely that has the biggest impact to improve patient care.
Mm-hmm. So it's mostly about patient care and education, and so not necessarily just self-promotion, but promoting plastic surgery as a field. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, absolutely.
And I would like to also commend Olivier Bramford. He's one of the British plastic surgeons. He's also part of the PRS team. And it's very interesting how he was able to truly disseminate some of his research and getting great altmetric scores through social media. But then again, he's a top influencer and a bit of a guru in the matter. So, but it would be for our listeners who are interested, I think he would be a good person to follow and see how he disseminates his research.
Great. Well, I just wanted to circle back around and ask one more question, which has sort of been touched on, but again, I think is sort of the focus of everything we do, which is getting back to the patient and the patient care. I do worry a lot about the information that patients are receiving online, and that's a much bigger question than this discussion. But specifically within this discussion, Dr. Pusic, do you have any recommendations for how we can talk to our patients about the information they're seeing online and how they can help sort through high quality research? And again, it's, potentially this is a very big and sophisticated question, but I'd love to have a way in which I can, approach this topic with my patients and help steer them, guide them moving forward.
So I would just say, very practically speaking, patients are online, and so you can't really just say don't go online. But what I do is I'll steer patients to websites that I know have high quality information that I've reviewed myself. Patients want to be looking at information online, but I think they can be guided by us to the website American Society of Plastic Surgeons, the American Cancer Society, websites where we know that the information is very good and is presented in a way that's easily digestible by patients. That would be my advice, is whenever you can, to direct your patients to sites that you know are credible and that you've looked at yourself.
Thanks so much. I think with that, we will wrap up our discussion. I want to thank Dr. Pusic and my co-ambassadors for another really interesting conversation. Before we go, I just want to send a quick reminder to our listeners to check out the other 2 August 2018 PRS Journal Club podcasts online. If you like what you hear, please share us with your colleagues and rate us in the Apple iTunes Store. And if you haven't already, follow us on the PRS Facebook page. Finally, don't miss out on our monthly Facebook Journal Club, where you can interact with each month's featured authors in real time. And a huge thank you again, Dr. Pusic, for joining us today.
My pleasure, Nikki. Thank you.